Hey everyone, today we have an incredible story of courage, love, and unexpected bonds in the wild frontier. Imagine a lonely cowboy living in isolation, whose quiet life is suddenly turned upside down when a desperate Apache woman knocks on his door, saying she's about to give birth. What happens next will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts, because this is a story you won't forget. Let's get started. The night was deep and silent, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind through the towering pines that surrounded the lonely cabin perched precariously on the rugged mountainside. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, flickering shadows across the rough-hewn walls, illuminating the solitary figure of Jackson, the cowboy who had chosen this isolated life as a sanctuary from a past he preferred to forget. His face, weathered and lined from years of exposure to the harsh sun and biting winds of the frontier, bore the quiet resignation of a man who had lost much and learned to find comfort in solitude. He nursed a tin cup of strong coffee, the bitter liquid warming his hands as he stared into the dancing flames, listening to the rhythmic, almost hypnotic sound of the firewood splitting and popping in the blaze. There was a certain peace to the loneliness, a rhythm to the silence that had become his companion. And yet, as the hours stretched into the deep shadows of midnight, the faint knock on the wooden door shattered that stillness, abrupt and insistent, echoing unnaturally in the empty cabin. Jackson froze, his instincts sharp and his hand brushing the grip of his revolver as he approached the door. Visitors were rare in these mountains, and a knock at this hour was almost unheard of, especially one so deliberate and urgent. The wind outside howled, rattling the door, but the knocks continued, each one punctuating the tension that had suddenly gripped the cabin. When he opened it slowly, the sight that met him was both unexpected and disarming. Standing on the threshold was a woman, her clothing simple and worn, dusted with the residue of travel and hardship. Her dark hair, long and slightly tangled, fell over her shoulders, framing a face pale from exhaustion yet radiant with a kind of fierce determination that made Jackson step back in surprise. Her eyes, wide and earnest, held a depth of fear and desperation that he could not ignore. She spoke softly, almost as if afraid her own words might vanish in the night air. I need help. I want to give birth to a baby." The words struck Jackson with a force he had not expected. He had encountered hardship, he had seen suffering, but there was a raw urgency in her voice that transcended all reason and compelled action. Without hesitation, he stepped aside, motioning her in. The interior of the cabin, though small and sparsely furnished, offered some semblance of safety. The firelight danced across the walls, illuminating the rough wooden beams and the simple, worn furniture. Jackson's movements were deliberate but swift, as he guided her to the bed near the fireplace, setting down a blanket for her to sit upon. The woman, who introduced herself as Nayeli, an Apache woman from a nearby canyon tribe, hesitated only a moment before allowing herself to collapse onto the bed, the exhaustion and strain of her journey finally overtaking her. She explained in hushed tones how she had been forced to flee her tribe due to escalating tensions with settlers and soldiers. In the chaos, she had become separated from her people and now found herself alone, heavily pregnant, and in desperate need of shelter. Jackson listened, his eyes studying her face, noting the pale cast of her skin, the sheen of sweat along her brow, and the subtle tremor in her hands. Despite the danger of the wild and the uncertainties of the frontier, a deep sense of responsibility surged within him. He gathered supplies quickly, taking cloths, water, and any basic provisions he could find, arranging a space near the fire that would be as comfortable and safe as possible for her labor. The wind outside intensified, rattling the cabin and whistling through the gaps in the wooden walls, but inside, the small room became a haven, a cocoon of warmth against the encroaching chill of night. Nayeli's voice trembled as she recounted the days of travel and hardship, the struggles she had endured alone, and the fear of facing childbirth without assistance. Jackson, though untrained in midwifery, relied on instinct and experience gained from a life spent in survival, offering calm instructions, steadying her hand, and assuring her that she was not alone. The night grew longer, the hours stretching into a tense vigil as he remained at her side. He watched over her, speaking softly when the pain threatened to overwhelm, guiding her through the contractions and offering encouragement born of a life shaped by adversity. With each wave of pain that washed over her, he marveled at her resilience, the raw courage that seemed to radiate from her very being. Her determination was unwavering, her will indomitable, and in those moments, Jackson felt a connection he had long thought impossible, the bond of human struggle and shared vulnerability. Time seemed to blur, measured only by the rhythm of labor and the crackle of the fire. Sweat glistened on Nayeli's brow, her breath came in ragged gasps, and Jackson never wavered, steadying her, whispering words of comfort, and doing everything he could to ease her suffering. Then, as the first pale light of dawn touched the horizon, painting the sky with muted shades of pink and gold, a sound filled the cabin that would forever remain etched in Jackson's memory, the first cry of a newborn baby. Nayeli, exhausted but radiant, reached out to hold her child, her tears mingling with the sweat and dust of the night's ordeal. Jackson, holding the tiny, fragile body in his own hands, felt a profound sense of awe. The miracle of life had unfolded before him, a reminder of the hope and strength that persisted even in the harshest of circumstances. The child's cry was a song of survival, of resilience, of the bond between two strangers brought together by fate and necessity. In the quiet aftermath, as the fire burned low and the wind softened its howl, Jackson and Nayeli shared a moment of deep, unspoken understanding. Words were unnecessary. The connection had been forged in sweat, pain, and unwavering care. Over the next few days, Jackson assisted Nayeli in recovering, tending to both mother and child with an attention born of instinct and growing affection. He hunted for food, fetched fresh water, and made the cabin a haven for their fragile new family. The bond between them deepened with each passing moment, built on trust, courage, and the shared experience of witnessing life's most intimate and transformative event. The once lonely cabin now rang with the soft cries of an infant, the quiet laughter of a mother, and the subdued, steady presence of a man who had found in his solitude not emptiness, but the capacity for compassion and connection. In the heart of the mountains, in a place far from the prying eyes of the world, Jackson began to understand that life, no matter how harsh or unforgiving, had a way of surprising even those who had long resigned themselves to loneliness. Nayeli, her strength tempered by the ordeal she had endured, and Jackson, whose heart had been closed off to the world, found in each other a shared purpose, a reason to face the uncertain days ahead with courage, hope, and a renewed sense of belonging. In the silence that followed the storm of birth, in the quiet mornings when the sunlight poured through the cabin windows, the three of them became a small, fragile family, each dependent on the other, each shaped by the choices and sacrifices that had brought them together in this remote corner of the frontier. The mountains, ever watchful and eternal, seemed to acknowledge the new life, the new bonds, and the unspoken promise that no matter what dangers the wilderness might hold, compassion, courage, and the human spirit would endure. The days that followed the birth of Nayeli's son were a delicate balance of recovery, care, and the quiet rhythm of frontier life. The cabin, once silent and lonely, now hummed with the soft cries of the baby and the rustling of blankets as Jackson moved about, tending to both mother and child. Despite his rugged exterior and years of solitary living, he found himself learning quickly, driven by a sense of responsibility and something deeper he hadn't felt in years. He bathed the newborn in warm water, his hands steady though gentle, marveling at the tiny fingers and the delicate way the child clutched his own. Nayeli watched him with a mixture of gratitude and amazement, her eyes softened by exhaustion but alight with a quiet strength. Even in the hardships of her journey, she had never imagined that someone would care so completely for her and her child without question or expectation. The small cabin became a sanctuary not just for survival but for healing. Jackson would leave at dawn to hunt or gather supplies, returning with game or fresh water, always ensuring that Nayeli had what she needed. Each evening, he would sit by the fire with her, sharing stories and listening to tales of her tribe and the land she loved. Through her words, Jackson began to understand a world he had never known, a connection to the land and its people that went far beyond mere survival. In turn, he shared his own history, his regrets, and the loneliness that had driven him to these mountains. Slowly, walls built from years of isolation and sorrow began to crumble, replaced with understanding and a bond that neither had anticipated. The baby, whom Nayeli named a pony, meaning butterfly in her native language, thrived under their combined care. Jackson marveled at every milestone, from the first tentative grasp of her mother's finger to the soft coos that greeted each new day. He found himself humming lullabies by the fire, his deep, rough voice carrying a warmth that surprised even him. Nayeli would laugh softly at his efforts, correcting his pronunciation of Apache words and sharing the songs of her people. In those moments, the cabin felt alive, a place where past pain was gradually replaced by hope and the quiet joy of new beginnings. But life in the mountains was not without its dangers. The frontier remained harsh and unforgiving, and Jackson knew that survival required vigilance. Wolves prowled the nearby forests, and tensions with settlers and rival groups in the region were never far from the surface. One morning, as Jackson prepared to track a deer that had been raiding his small garden, Nayeli approached him with a worried expression. "I fear for the boy," she said softly. "The soldiers and settlers, they may come looking for us." Jackson's jaw tightened. He had always known that isolation was a fragile shield, and now that he had something to protect beyond himself, the weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever. He nodded, his mind already calculating, planning for any threat that might come their way. Weeks passed, and their vigilance paid off as they managed to keep a pony safe, but the isolation took its toll on Nayeli's spirits. She missed her tribe, the community, and the familiar rhythm of life in her homeland. Jackson, sensing her growing melancholy, began teaching her small ways to adapt to life in the mountains while still honoring her heritage. They planted a garden with traditional herbs and vegetables, learned to cook with the ingredients the land offered, and created a small space for a pony where she could play safely while Nayeli regained her strength. Together, they forged a life that was both sustainable and meaningful, a blend of Jackson's rugged frontier skills and Nayeli's deep connection to her culture. Over time, their bond deepened beyond mere companionship. The nights spent by the fire, sharing stories and tending to a pony, became moments of quiet intimacy. Jackson found himself drawn to Nayeli in ways he had not expected, captivated not just by her strength, but by the quiet warmth she brought into his life. Nayeli, in turn, saw in Jackson a steadfast protector, a man whose heart had room for love and courage despite the scars of the past. Yet words of affection were rare, subtle gestures speaking louder than spoken promises. A gentle touch, a shared glance, the way Jackson would instinctively shield her from the chill of the mountain air, these small moments became the language of their growing connection. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant peaks, casting a golden glow across the cabin, Jackson and Nayeli sat together outside, watching a pony explore the clearing near the cabin. The baby toddled unsteadily, giggling as he stumbled over rocks and tufts of grass. Nayeli's hand rested lightly on Jackson's arm, a silent acknowledgement of the trust and affection that had grown between them. "I never imagined I would find peace here," she whispered, her voice carried by the soft wind. Jackson nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon, reflecting on the irony that the man who had once shunned the world had now built a family in the wilderness, a life worth protecting with every ounce of his being. The seasons shifted, and the cabin witnessed the quiet rhythms of life. Winter brought snow that blanketed the mountains in white, forcing Jackson and Nayeli to rely on their skills and each other more than ever. Fires burned longer, meals were simpler, and the nights were filled with the warmth of the family they had created. Even in the harsh cold, there was comfort in their togetherness, a resilience born from struggle and shared devotion. Each challenge they faced only strengthened the bond, teaching them that survival was not just a matter of skill, but of heart. As the months passed, whispers of the outside world reached them, settlers moving further into the region, rumors of disputes with tribes, and the ever-present threat of danger. Jackson knew that one day they might have to leave the sanctuary of the mountains, but for now they were determined to make the most of their solitude. They built a stronger cabin, reinforced their defenses, and continued to nurture a pony, teaching her the ways of the land and the traditions of her mother. Their days were full but serene, marked by the simple pleasures of watching their child grow and the quiet intimacy of shared labor and love. One crisp morning, as the first light of winter glinted off the snow, Nayeli turned to Jackson with a smile that held both gratitude and something deeper. "We have built something here," she said softly, "something worth protecting, worth fighting for." Jackson's gaze met hers, and in that moment words were unnecessary. The life they had created, fragile yet enduring, was testament to courage, trust, and the unexpected bonds that arise when hearts are open. Together, they faced the frontier not as solitary souls, but as a family united by choice and necessity, by love and resilience. The mountains, ever silent and watchful, seemed to approve, holding their secrets and witnessing the growth of a family born from hardship, compassion, and the unyielding spirit of survival. In the end, Jackson realized that the loneliness he had once embraced was not the truest measure of freedom. True freedom lay in connection, in the willingness to care, to risk, and to love. Nayeli, a pony, and he had carved a sanctuary in the wilderness, a life filled with purpose, warmth, and the enduring promise that no matter what dangers the world might hold, they would face them together. The frontier had tested them, challenged them, and ultimately gifted them with something rarer than solitude: family, trust, and hope that would endure far beyond the harshness of the mountains. As the wind whispered through the trees and the fire crackled in the hearth, the cabin no longer felt lonely. It was alive with the quiet hum of life, the laughter of a child, and the unspoken bond between two people who had found, against all odds, a reason to believe in tomorrow. And in that quiet, profound moment, Jackson understood that sometimes the most extraordinary stories are not written in history books or sung in ballads. They are lived quietly, fiercely, and fully in the hearts of those who dare to open themselves to love, courage, and the unpredictable beauty of life.